I was sitting in a holding room at the county jail when it finally hit me. I had done nothing wrong. Not a single thing. And yet there I was, fingerprinted, photographed, and waiting for a public defender I had never met, while my husband sat at home, probably eating dinner, probably watching television, probably not losing a single second of sleep over the fact that the woman he married was being processed like a criminal. I want you to let that sit for a moment. I want you to understand something before this story goes anywhere. I am not someone who grew up in chaos. I am not someone who made reckless decisions. I did not marry badly because I was young and foolish. I was 31 years old. I had a good job. I had a savings account. I had a plan for my life. I had done every single thing you are supposed to do to protect yourself from disaster. And none of it mattered. Because the people who were supposed to love me had already decided, quietly, carefully, and completely without my knowledge, to use my life as raw material for their own. My name is not important. What happened to me is. And by the time this story is over, I think you will understand why I spent 2 full years afterward not trusting anyone, not a neighbor, not a coworker, not a friend. I think you will understand why I still flinch sometimes when someone I love asks to borrow something simple. A pen, a phone charger, something small. Because when the people you love take from you, they never start with the big things. They start with the small ones. And they never, ever stop. Let me tell you about the life I had before. I met Daniel when I was 28. He was 33, charming in the way that some men are charming, not loud about it, not performative. He was the kind of man who remembered small things. What coffee you ordered 3 weeks ago, the name of your childhood dog, the anniversary of something difficult you only mentioned once. I thought that meant he was paying attention. I understand now that it meant something else entirely. We dated for 2 years. He proposed at a restaurant we loved, with a ring that was not expensive but was exactly right. A thin gold band with a single oval stone. Simple, exactly what I would have chosen myself. I said yes before he finished asking. His family was large. There were 2 older brothers, Marcus and Todd, a sister named Renee, and at the center of all of them, his mother, Loretta. Loretta was the kind of woman who commanded a room the moment she entered it. She was warm on the surface, generous with compliments, always the first to offer help. She had this way of making you feel chosen, specifically chosen, like out of everyone in the world, she had decided you were worth her time. I was flattered by her. I am embarrassed by that now. Marcus was the oldest. He was quiet, watchful, the kind of man who sat in the corner at family dinners and observed everyone else without ever quite joining in. I always thought he was just introverted. It took me years to understand that he was calculating. Todd was loud, funny, and perpetually broke. Every family dinner came with a new story about a deal that almost worked, a business that was almost profitable, a partner who had almost come through. He was always almost successful, never quite. Renee was the closest to Daniel in age. She was warm in a way that felt genuine. Of everyone in that family, she was the one I trusted most. That was also, I would later learn, the most dangerous mistake I made. Daniel and I got married on a Saturday in September. It was not a big wedding. 63 people. My parents, my brother, a handful of friends, and what seemed like half of Daniel's extended family filling the other side of the room. I remember looking at them from the altar and thinking how lucky I was to be gaining a family this large, this present, this warm. I remember that thought specifically. I go back to it sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, and I try to locate the exact moment when a thought that good became something so terrible. We moved into a house the year after we got married. Not a large house. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a neighborhood where people walked their dogs in the evening and waved at each other from porches. Daniel worked in logistics. I worked in marketing at a mid-sized company that sold medical equipment. Between us, we were comfortable, not wealthy, comfortable. We had a plan. Pay down the mortgage. Start a business together someday, something small, something flexible. Have children in a few years when we felt more settled. Retire early if we could manage it. It was not an extraordinary plan, but it was ours, and we had built it carefully, and I loved it. Daniel's family was always around. That is something I want you to understand, because it matters to what comes next. They were not occasional visitors. They were a constant presence. Loretta came for Sunday dinners. Marcus dropped by unannounced sometimes on weekday evenings, always with a reason, always with something to fix or something he needed to borrow. Todd called Daniel constantly, always with a proposition of some kind, always with an opportunity that needed to be acted on immediately. I thought that was what close families looked like. I had grown up in a smaller, quieter family. My parents were loving but contained. We did not have this kind of loud, overlapping, always in each other's business dynamic. Part of me found it overwhelming, but part of me found it beautiful. I wanted to belong to it. The first red flag, and I want to be clear that at the time I did not recognize it as a red flag at all, came about 8 months after we moved into the house. I was going through our mail one evening, the regular stack of bills and catalogs and credit card offers, and I found a statement I did not recognize. It was for a credit card. In my name. I assumed it was a duplicate, or a mix-up, or something administrative that Daniel had handled on my behalf. We had just refinanced one of our accounts, and there had been a lot of paperwork flying around. I set it aside. I did not open it. I set it aside. I want you to remember that. The second thing happened about 3 months later. I was on the phone with my bank, a routine call, something about updating my contact information, and the representative mentioned, almost in passing, that there had been a recent change to my address on file. I told her there had been no change. She said she showed a change 2 months prior, a mailing address in a town I had never heard of, a town 40 minutes from where we lived. I had her read it back to me twice. I did not recognize it. She offered to reverse it. I said yes. I thanked her and hung up. And then I stood in my kitchen for a long time, trying to find the innocent explanation. Maybe Daniel had handled something. Maybe a form got mixed up. Maybe someone at the bank made an error. I called Daniel. He was casual about it. He said he thought he might have accidentally used an old address for something, that he would look into it, that it was probably nothing. He said it was probably nothing. And because I loved him, and because I trusted him, and because I had absolutely no framework yet for understanding what was actually happening, I believed him. That evening, Marcus came over for dinner. He and Daniel sat at the kitchen table after we ate, talking in that low, quick way they had when they did not want to be overheard. I was washing dishes. I could not make out words. Only the rhythm of the conversation, quick questions, quick answers, something being agreed upon, something being settled. I told myself it was just brothers talking. I told myself that a lot. And here is the thing about telling yourself something. If you say it enough times, it stops being a thought and starts being a wall. And walls are very good at keeping the truth out. About 14 months after we moved into the house, I had a routine appointment at a car dealership. Nothing significant, just a service appointment. Oil change, tire rotation, the usual. The service manager asked me to confirm some of my information in their system before they got started. Standard procedure. He pulled up my record, glanced at his screen, and then looked up at me with an expression I could not quite read. He said my credit score had changed significantly since my last visit. I asked him what he meant. He said, and I want you to understand that he said this gently, clearly trying not to embarrass me, he said it had dropped. Substantially, that some of the financing options they usually offered to their preferred customers might not be available to me at the current number. I told him that was impossible. I had checked my credit less than 3 months before. It was fine, better than fine. He turned the screen toward me. The number I saw was 521. I had left that dealership 8 months earlier with a score over 760. I drove home in a silence so complete it felt physical. It felt like the inside of the car was made of something solid, something pressing against my chest with every mile. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up my full credit report on my laptop. What I found there took me almost an hour to understand. There were 6 credit cards I had never applied for. 6 combined credit limits totaling just over $94,000. Most of them maxed out. There were 3 personal loans I had never taken. There was a business line of credit attached to a company I had never heard of, Meridian Supply Solutions, LLC. There was a second mortgage application, an application, not a completed mortgage, tied to an address in that same town the bank had mentioned, the one 40 minutes away. I sat there looking at all of it for a long time. And then I did something that I think about often when I try to understand my own behavior in those months. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I got into bed. And I went to sleep. I have thought about that a lot. Why I closed the laptop, why I did not call Daniel immediately, why I did not call the police or my parents or a lawyer or anyone. I think the truth is that I already knew. Not the full picture, not the scope of it, not the names or the amounts or the years of planning that had gone into it. But somewhere underneath the shock, underneath the numbness, underneath the very human need to find an innocent explanation for things that have no innocent explanation, I already knew. And knowing was so terrible that I chose, for one more night, not to know. The next morning I called in sick to work. I sat at that kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad, and I spent 6 hours going through everything. Meridian Supply Solutions, LLC. I searched that name first. It was registered as a business in our state, registered 14 months ago, almost exactly when we had moved into the house. The registered agent was a name I did not recognize. But the address on the filing was ours. Our home address. And then I found the second filing, an amendment to the original registration, filed 8 months later. This amendment added a new officer to the company. The officer's name was Daniel. I stared at that name for a very long time. And then I looked at the other officer. Marcus. I went back to the credit report. The business line of credit attached to Meridian Supply Solutions, $47,000, drawn down to less than $200 remaining. I searched the company name again, this time more carefully. There were vendor contracts. There were purchase orders. There were invoices for equipment that did not seem to exist, billed to companies I could not verify, paid out to accounts I could not trace. I found a news article, small, local, almost a footnote, about a supply chain fraud investigation in our county. 3 companies named. Meridian Supply Solutions was not one of them, but 2 of the companies named as victims were companies I found in Meridian's paperwork. I sat with that article for a long time. And then I found the piece that made everything inside me go cold. In the original business filing for Meridian Supply Solutions, the designated responsible party for all financial obligations was me. My name. My social security number. My signature. A signature that looked, to anyone who did not know better, exactly like mine. I need to stop here for a moment and tell you something that is very hard to describe. There is a specific kind of horror that comes not from something frightening, but from something familiar turned wrong. Looking at my own name on those documents, my name, my number, my entire legal identity attached to something I had never agreed to, never seen, never touched, felt like looking in a mirror and seeing someone else's face. I had not been robbed. I had been replaced. They had taken my identity and they had walked around in it, and they had made decisions and signed documents, and borrowed money, and run a fraudulent operation, and done all of it wearing my name like a costume. I spent the rest of that day pulling threads. The 6 credit cards, 4 of them had been opened in the same 3-month window, 14 months before, right when we moved. The other 2 were opened in the following 6 months. The billing statements had been going to that address 40 minutes away, the one I had never heard of. I looked up that address. It was a house. A rented house, as far as I could tell. I would later learn that Marcus had been renting it under a false name, using it purely as a mail drop. A physical address to receive financial correspondence that was never meant for my eyes. The personal loans were taken through 3 different online lenders. Each one had been applied for using my employment information. My actual employer, my actual income, information Daniel had access to because we were married, and because we filed taxes together, and because I had trusted him with every number that mattered in my life. The second mortgage application, the one that had not gone through, had been declined because the lender had caught a discrepancy in the income documentation. Someone had inflated my salary by $28,000 on the application. $28,000. They had tried to make me look wealthier than I was so they could borrow more in my name. It had not worked that time. But they had tried. And that detail more than any other, told me something I had been refusing to accept all day. This was not impulsive. This was not a moment of desperation. This was not Daniel getting in over his head and making a bad decision. This was planned. This was organized. This was a system. And I had been the raw material for every piece of it. Daniel came home at 6:30. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The laptop was open. The legal pad was covered in notes. I had printed out 17 pages from the credit bureau and arranged them in chronological order. He walked in, set down his bag, looked at me, looked at the table, and his face did something I will never forget. It did not show guilt. It showed calculation. That is the part that still makes me feel cold when I think about it. Not the guilt, not the panic, not the shame of a man caught doing something terrible. Calculation. He was deciding, in real time, what version of this story he was going to tell me. I spoke before he could. I said, I know about Meridian. He said nothing. I said, I know about the credit cards. I know about the loans. I know about the address in Callaway, that was the name of the town, and I know that my name is on documents I never signed, and my social security number is attached to a business I have never heard of. Still nothing. I said, I want you to tell me everything, right now, all of it. And he sat down. And he began to talk. What he told me that night was a version of the truth, partial, carefully edited, designed to give me enough to seem honest while protecting the parts that were most dangerous. He said it had started as Marcus's idea, a business venture, supply chain consulting, nothing illegal. He said things had gotten complicated, some contracts had not worked out, some clients had not paid, Marcus had made some decisions Daniel had not approved of. He said he had not realized how far it had gone. He said he had been trying to fix it. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. He said he would make it right. He said all the things a person says when they are trying to prevent you from burning everything down before they have time to move the important things out. I listened to all of it. And I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think it is important. I believed him. Not entirely. Not with the part of me that had spent 6 hours reading documents and building a timeline, but with the part of me that was still, underneath all of it, a woman who was in love with her husband and who desperately wanted this to have an innocent explanation. I believed just enough to wait. And waiting, I would learn very soon, was exactly what they needed me to do. I want to stop here. I want to step out of the story for just a moment. Because I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, why didn't she leave that night? Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she walk out the door the moment he started talking and go somewhere safe and let the legal system handle the rest? And I understand why you are thinking that. I have asked myself the same question more times than I can count. The honest answer is that there is no simple answer. When you love someone, when you have built your entire adult life with someone, when your name and their name are on the same mortgage and the same tax returns and the same emergency contact forms, leaving is not a door you walk through. It is a wall you have to break down, brick by brick in the dark. And that night, I did not yet have the tools to break it. I also did not yet know the full truth. And that is the part I need to tell you now. Because what Daniel told me that night was, as I said, a partial version. The full version was something else entirely. 4 days after Daniel's confession, if you can call something so incomplete and so carefully managed a confession, Loretta called me. She called on a Tuesday morning, when she knew Daniel would be at work. She asked if she could come over. She said she wanted to talk to me as a mother, woman to woman. She said she knew things were difficult right now, and she wanted me to understand the full picture. I should have said no. I understand that now. I should have told her we had nothing to talk about and then called a lawyer. Instead, I said yes. She came over that afternoon. She brought food, which she always did, as though enough good cooking could neutralize any situation. She set it on the counter and she sat across from me, and she folded her hands on the table, and she looked me in the eyes and she said, "None of this was supposed to touch you." That was the first thing she said. I want you to understand the architecture of that sentence. None of this was supposed to touch you. Not, this was wrong. Not, we should not have done this. Not, I am sorry for what we did to you. None of this was supposed to touch you. As though the crime was not the fraud itself, as though the crime was that I had found out. She told me, in the calm and reasonable tone of a woman explaining something to a child, that the family had been in financial trouble for years before Daniel and I got married. That Marcus had a gambling debt, a serious one, the kind that comes with people showing up at your door, and that she had needed to find a solution. That she had raised her children to protect each other, and that sometimes protecting each other required difficult decisions. She said that my credit history, when Daniel showed it to her, had been, in her word, useful. Useful. She said it had been meant to be temporary, that once the debt was cleared and the business got established, everything would be paid back, that I was never supposed to know because it was never supposed to last long enough for me to find out. I sat across from this woman who had welcomed me into her family, this woman who had sat at my table and hugged me and cried at my wedding, this woman who had called me daughter. And I said, "How long ago did you plan this?" She looked at me steadily. She said, "We started putting the structure together before the wedding." Before the wedding. Before I said yes. Before I walked down an aisle toward the man I thought loved me. Before I signed a marriage certificate that was, I now understand, also a business document, the legal tie that would make my identity accessible to all of them. The room seemed very far away. I asked her one more question. I asked her who else knew. She paused. And in that pause, I understood that everyone knew. Every single person who had smiled at me across that dinner table, every person who had called me family. Every one of them. Renee called me 2 days after Loretta's visit. She was crying. She said she needed to see me. She said she was sorry. She said she had wanted to tell me for years, but she was afraid of her mother, afraid of Marcus, afraid of what would happen to the family if she spoke. I agreed to meet her. We sat in a parking lot of a coffee shop, both of us in my car, because neither of us wanted to be somewhere public for this conversation. She told me everything. Not the version Loretta had given me, the version carefully framed to make the crime seem like an act of desperate love, a temporary measure, a family protecting itself. Renee told me the truth. She told me that Loretta had spent 6 months before the wedding researching me, my credit history obtained through Daniel, my employment, my income, my savings. She had assessed what I was worth to them financially, the way you assess an asset before you acquire it. She told me that the plan had been discussed at a family meeting, an actual meeting, with Loretta at the head of the table, while Daniel and I were dadding, about how to use my financial identity once we were married. She told me that Todd had been involved too, that he had been the one to set up the shell addresses and the mail drops, that his various business ventures were, in part, ways to move money through accounts connected to my name and then out again. She told me that Daniel had resisted at first, that he had argued with Loretta, that he had said he actually loved me and did not want to do this. And then he had done it anyway. Renee was sobbing by the end. She said she had liked me. She said she had tried to stay close to me because she felt guilty, and being kind to me was the only way she could live with herself. I sat in that car for a long time after she finished talking. I was not crying, I noticed that. I was past the part where crying was available to me. What I felt instead was something colder, something more precise. A kind of clarity that comes, I think, only when the last possible innocent explanation has been removed. I said, "Did you know about the fraud investigation?" She went very still. She said, "What investigation?" There was an investigation. I had not told Daniel that I knew about it. I had not told Loretta. I had gone very quiet after my kitchen table discovery, and in that quiet I had done something that, looking back, was probably the smartest thing I did in that entire period. I had gone to see a lawyer. Not a divorce lawyer, a criminal defense attorney, because I had read enough of those documents to understand that what I was looking at was not just civil fraud. What I was looking at was wire fraud, identity theft, and potentially conspiracy charges, and that my name was attached to the entity at the center of it. My lawyer had made some calls. What she found out was that the county had opened an investigation into a network of shell companies tied to supply chain fraud. The investigation had been ongoing for 14 months. They had subpoenaed records from 3 financial institutions. My name appeared in those records 47 times. Not Daniel's name, not Marcus's name, not Loretta or Todd. Mine. Because Meridian Supply Solutions, and 2 related entities I had not even found yet, were all registered under my identity. All the financial obligations flowed, on paper, back to me. I was not a witness in this investigation. I was a suspect. The total value of the fraudulent transactions attached to my identity, across all entities, across all accounts, was $312,000. $312,000. I had never seen that number until my lawyer wrote it on a legal pad and pushed it across the table toward me. I stared at it for so long she asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I was not fine. The investigators came to my house on a Thursday morning at 7:15. There were 4 of them, 2 in plain clothes, 2 uniformed. They had a warrant. I had known they were coming. My lawyer had been tracking the investigation and had advised me that an arrest was possible, that I should not be surprised if it happened before we had completed our defense preparation. I was not surprised. But nothing my lawyer said could have fully prepared me for standing in my own doorway, in my own home, and watching 4 people with badges explain to me that I was being placed under arrest on charges including wire fraud and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Daniel was standing behind me. He did not say a word. He did not say, "This is a mistake." He did not say, "She had nothing to do with this." He did not step forward and say, "Take me instead." He stood there. And he watched them put handcuffs on his wife. And he did not say one single word. I was taken to the county jail. I was processed. I was placed in a holding room. And that is where this story began. That is the room I told you about at the very start, the room where it finally hit me, sitting under fluorescent lights with ink still on my fingers from the fingerprinting, that I had done nothing wrong. Not one single thing. And yet there I was. I spent 11 hours in that holding room. My lawyer was there within 2 hours of my arrest. She had a folder. She had been ready for this. She told me very plainly what we were dealing with. The charges were serious. The evidence the investigators had, on the surface, looked damning: my name, my social security number, my signature on documents, my identity woven into the fabric of a fraud operation that had defrauded vendors and financial institutions of more than $300,000. But the evidence of my actual involvement? There was none. Because I had not been involved. Not in a single transaction. Not in a single decision. not in a single email or phone call or meeting related to Meridian Supply Solutions or any of the related entities. The fraud had been constructed specifically to use my name while keeping me completely ignorant, which meant that the case against me, on its merits, was hollow. But hollow cases can still consume years of your life. They can still cost you your job, your savings, your reputation, your marriage, and your mental health. I already knew about the marriage. I was about to learn about the rest. My employer was notified of the arrest. This is standard. When you are charged with a financial crime, your employer typically finds out. I was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the resolution of the case. 11 years of excellent performance reviews. 11 years of never missing a deadline. 11 years of building something in that company. Gone. Suspended, pending. My bank accounts were flagged. Not frozen, not yet, but flagged. I could not apply for any new financial products. I could not refinance anything. I could not make any significant financial move without triggering scrutiny. I was 34 years old and I had been reduced, financially and professionally, to almost nothing. Meanwhile, Daniel was still in our house. And here is the thing that I want you to understand about what came next. I did not give up. I know that sounds simple. I know it sounds like the obvious choice. Of course you would not give up. Of course you would fight. But I want you to understand what fighting looked like from inside that situation. Exhausted, humiliated, financially crippled, legally exposed, and married to the man who had done this to me. Fighting looked like getting up every morning and doing the next necessary thing even when every part of you wanted to simply collapse. I got up every morning. I did the next necessary thing. 3 weeks after my arrest, my lawyer filed a motion to dismiss based on lack of evidence of personal involvement. She also, through proper legal channels, formally requested cooperation from any party with knowledge of the fraud's actual structure and execution. Daniel received a letter from the investigators. Not an arrest warrant, not yet, just a letter requesting a voluntary interview. He called me. He was not calm. He said he needed to talk to me. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said he had been trying to manage everything, and it had gone further than he intended, and he did not want to go to prison. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask how my case was going. He said he did not want to go to prison. I told him he should contact a lawyer. He said he needed me to tell the investigators that he had tried to protect me, that he had not wanted this, that he had been as much a victim of his family as I had. There was a long silence on the phone. And then I said, "I am done protecting you." 4 words. They were the 4 truest words I had said in years. He went to the investigators, voluntarily 2 days later. What he told them, and I only know this because it became part of the discovery material in my case, was extensive. He confirmed that the fraud operation had been conceived and directed by Loretta and Marcus. He confirmed that my identity had been deliberately selected and used without my knowledge. He confirmed the shell address structure Todd had established. He confirmed that the original business registration had been filed using a forged version of my signature, a signature traced from documents I had signed during our home purchase. He also confirmed something that my lawyer had suspected, but had not yet been able to prove. Loretta had done this before. Not with my identity, with someone else's. A woman named Angela, who had been engaged to Todd 8 years earlier. The engagement had ended. Angela had spent 3 years fighting credit fraud she never understood the source of. I was not the first. Once Daniel cooperated, everything moved quickly. Marcus was arrested 6 weeks after my arrest. The charges against him were significantly more serious than mine: racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Todd was arrested 11 days after Marcus. He tried to run. He did not get far. Loretta was arrested on a Tuesday morning, at her own home, in front of her neighbors. My lawyer told me about it and asked if I wanted to know the details. I said yes. She was arrested at 7:45 in the morning. She was wearing a bathrobe. One of her neighbors filmed it on a phone. I am not proud of the fact that I watched that video more than once. But I did. Renee cooperated with investigators voluntarily. She had been the one who had never fully participated, who had known and been complicit through silence, but who had not actively assisted in the fraud. Her cooperation, combined with her limited role, meant she avoided criminal charges. She received 2 years of probation. She sent me a letter. I have never opened it. It sits in a drawer. I do not know if I will ever open it. Daniel pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. As part of his plea, he agreed to full cooperation, restitution obligations, and a sentence recommendation of 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was sentenced 6 months after his plea. He served 14 months before being released on good behavior. I was at work the day he was sentenced. I had gotten my job back by then. The charges against me had been formally dismissed 8 weeks prior, with a full statement from the investigating office confirming that I had been a victim of identity theft and had no involvement in or knowledge of the fraudulent enterprise. My employer offered me my position back with back pay for the administrative leave period. I sat in that office on the day Daniel was sentenced, doing my work, answering my emails and feeling nothing. Not relief, not anger, not grief. Nothing. And then, at exactly 3:14 in the afternoon, I stood up from my desk, walked to the bathroom, sat on the floor of a locked stall, and cried for 20 minutes. Not for Daniel, not for the marriage, not for the family I thought I was gaining. I cried because I was so tired. I cried because I had been fighting so hard for so long that I had not stopped once to grieve what had been taken from me. And that, I think, was the beginning of the real recovery. The civil case took another 18 months. I sued Loretta, Marcus, and Todd for damages. I sued the estate of Meridian Supply Solutions for the full value of the fraudulent debts attached to my name. I had an excellent attorney, different from my criminal defense lawyer, this one specializing in civil fraud recovery. The total judgment in my favor was $387,000. I will never see most of that money. Loretta had hidden assets for years, and the process of finding and recovering them was long and only partially successful. Marcus had nothing left after his criminal fines and restitution orders. Todd had been broke for most of his adult life, as it turned out. What I recovered, after legal fees and the long process of rebuilding my credit, was enough. Not enough to make me whole. There is no dollar amount that does that. But enough. My credit score is now higher than it was before any of this happened. It took 3 years to get there. It took an enormous amount of documentation, dispute filings, and conversations with financial institutions that I never wanted to have. But it got there. I want to tell you what my life looks like now. Not because I think it is remarkable, not because I want you to think this story has a perfectly tidy ending, but because I think there is something important in the ordinary details of what rebuilding looks like from the inside. I moved out of the house 6 weeks after my arrest. I did not want to stay there. I could not look at the kitchen table without seeing the stack of printed credit reports. I could not walk through the front door without feeling the ghost of 4 people with badges standing on the other side of it. I rented an apartment on the other side of the city, small, 2 bedrooms. One of them I used as an office. The other I furnished slowly, piece by piece, with things I had chosen myself. Nothing from the house. Nothing I had shared with Daniel. Starting from almost nothing at 34 years old is a specific kind of hard that I do not think I can fully describe. I am going to try anyway. It is hard in a way that is not dramatic. It does not look like collapse. It looks like very ordinary tasks performed in a state of profound exhaustion. It looks like filing forms and making phone calls and sitting on hold for 40 minutes to dispute a charge on an account you never opened. It looks like eating dinner alone in a quiet apartment and realizing, somewhere around the 3rd week, that the quiet has stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like something else. Like safety. Like the first time in years that nothing in my environment was working against me. I went back to therapy. I had been in therapy briefly in my mid-20s and had stopped when things got busy. I went back and I went consistently, once a week for the first year, once every 2 weeks in the second year. My therapist, I will call her Dr. Marsh, because that is not her name, had a practice that specialized in betrayal trauma. Not just romantic betrayal. The specific kind of damage that comes from discovering that people you trusted had a hidden agenda all along. She said something to me in our second session that I have thought about many times since. She said, "The goal is not to become someone who trusts less. The goal is to become someone who reads context better." I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I understand now. Trusting less is a kind of damage. It seals you off from connection, from intimacy, from the basic human experience of allowing other people in. It is not protection. It is just a different kind of suffering. Reading context better is different. It means learning to notice the small things, the address that changed on a bank account, the statement you set aside without opening, the low conversation you could not quite hear. It means developing the habit of not explaining away the things that do not add up. It means trusting yourself first. I spent a long time after all of this not trusting myself, questioning every judgment I had ever made. How had I missed it? How had I not seen it? What kind of person builds a life inside a lie that large without noticing? Dr. Marsh was patient with those questions. She had heard versions of them before. She said, "You did not miss it because you were foolish. You missed it because you were human, and because you were in love, and because the people who did this to you were very, very good at what they did. They had done it before. They had practiced. And they had practiced specifically to be undetectable to someone who loved them." I hold on to that. I do not always believe it. But I hold on to it. There are things I know now that I did not know before. I am going to tell you some of them because I think they matter. I know that identity theft within marriage is more common than most people understand. I know this because after my case became public record, and fraud cases become public record, there is no way around that. I was contacted by 11 women and 3 men who had experienced something similar. Not identical, but similar enough that when they described it, I recognized the shape of it immediately. The forged signature on a document, the account opened in a spouse's name, the address on file changed without the account holder's knowledge, the slow, patient accumulation of access. I know now that a married person has a specific and significant vulnerability that single people do not have, because marriage, in the legal and financial sense, is the granting of proximity. It is the granting of access. The person you marry has your tax returns, your employment information, your banking details, your social security number. They have the ability to forge your signature and have it look credible because they have seen it thousands of times. They have the ability to change your address and provide a plausible explanation when questioned. Marriage is an enormous act of trust. And trust is not a flaw. Trust is necessary. Trust is what makes human life possible. But trust without oversight is a vulnerability. I now freeze my credit. I check my full credit report every 90 days. I have a separate account that Daniel never had access to, and that is registered to an address only I know. I have a document kept offline, stored physically, that lists every account, every institution, every financial product attached to my name. Not because I am paranoid. Because I am informed. There is a difference. I also want to say something about Loretta. She was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in federal prison. She served 3 years and 2 months before being released on parole. I was not in the courtroom for her sentencing. I was advised by my lawyer to submit a victim impact statement, and I did. I spent 3 weeks writing it. It was 4 pages long. I read it twice before I submitted it, and then I put it in a file, and I have not read it since. I did not want to watch her be sentenced. Not because I did not want justice. I wanted justice with every fiber of everything I am. But because I understood, by that point, that my healing was not located in that courtroom. It was not going to be completed by watching a woman in a bathrobe be led away. It was going to be completed, slowly, in that small apartment, at that office job I loved, in my therapist's quiet office, in the ordinary, unremarkable, profoundly valuable process of rebuilding a life that was mine. Only mine. I told you at the start of this story that I would tell you everything. I have told you almost everything. But there is one thing I still do not know. One thread I was never able to pull completely. In the discovery materials from my criminal case, there was a reference to a third entity, not Meridian, not the two related LLCs my lawyer identified during the investigation. A third one. The name on the filing was different from the others, not a business-sounding name, something else, something that looked, to my lawyer's eye, like a holding company, something designed to sit at the top of the structure and receive funds from the entities below it. That entity was registered in a state where disclosure requirements are minimal. The registered agent was a name that led to a shelf company, a company that existed only on paper, with no physical presence, no employees, no activity other than receiving funds and distributing them elsewhere. The investigators could not fully trace where those funds went. The total amount that moved through that entity, during the period of the fraud, was approximately $88,000. My name was not on that entity. No one's name was on that entity, really. That was the point. And here is the thing that still keeps me up sometimes. That entity was registered 18 months before Daniel, and I started dating. Not before the wedding, not before we moved in together. Before we started dating. Which means that whatever the original plan was, whatever the full shape of this thing was, from the beginning, it started before I was even in Daniel's life. Which raises a question I have never been able to answer. Did Daniel meet me because he loved me? Or did Daniel meet me because of what I was worth? I do not know. I may never know. And that, more than the arrest, more than the credit score, more than the 11 hours in a holding room, more than any of it, that is the thing I carry. Not anger, not grief exactly. Just a question. Sitting quietly in a drawer, like an unopened letter. I have shared this story because I believe it matters. Not for sympathy. I am not looking for sympathy. I am sharing it because I think there are people listening to this who recognize something in it. Maybe not the exact shape of it. Maybe not the fraud or the courtroom or the credit report with 6 accounts you never opened. But the feeling, that specific feeling of standing in your own life and realizing that what you thought was solid ground had been hollow all along. If that is you, I want you to know something. You can rebuild from hollow ground. It takes longer than you think it should. It looks less dramatic than you imagine it will. It is mostly forms and phone calls and early bedtimes and therapy appointments. But it happens. And on the other side of it, not at the end, because I do not think this kind of thing ends, exactly, but on the other side, there is a life that is genuinely yours. Nobody's raw material. Nobody's collateral. Just yours. There is still one part of this story I have not shared. Something that came to light almost 2 years after the sentencing. Something involving Angela, the woman Loretta had done this to before me. Something that changes the shape of everything I thought I understood. I will tell you that story. Just not today. If you want to hear it, you know where to find me.